Thank you for joining us today for a discussion about telecommuting or telework. This webinar is brought to you by the Bay Area Air Quality Management District and the Spare the Air Employer Program. I'm Stephanie Anderson, Employer Program Coordinator, and I'll be your MC today. The Air District is the public agency entrusted with regulating stationary sources of air pollution in the 9 counties that surround the San Francisco Bay. The Spare the Air Employer Program helps connect employers to resources who can help them implement clean air policies and practices. Why is the Spare the Air Employer Program presenting a webinar on telework? Because by reducing driving, we can significantly cut carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas emissions and improve local air quality. Today, you'll also find out how telework can save your company money. We are very pleased to have Elham Shirazi, who has been a consultant to 511 Rideshare since 2005, as our presenter. Elham has 27 years of experience in developing telework and flexible scheduling programs. She has developed resource materials, conducted workshops, worked with hundreds of employers, and evaluated the impacts of telework and flexible scheduling on employers, employees, and trip reduction. She has also helped develop regional telework resources throughout California and across the country. She has advised the White House and U.S. congressional leaders on policy development for furthering interest in telework. Here are just a few of Elham's clients: Delta Airlines, County of Los Angeles, Home Depot, Kaiser Permanente, MetLife, State of Georgia, GE Energy, Georgia Power, Autodesk, Yahoo, UPS, County of Santa Clara, City of Los Angeles Department of Telecommunications, Humana, and there are many others. Before I turn things over to Elham, I want to cover a couple of housekeeping items. There will be plenty of time for questions at the end of Elham's presentation. To ask a question, just move your cursor to the top of your screen and click on the Q&A box. This webinar is being recorded. The video recording and presentation slides will be made available on www.employersparetheair.org within a couple of days, and we'll let you know when that is available. There will be a brief survey at the end of the webinar. The survey will appear as a pop-up screen. If you need to leave the webinar early, the screen will pop up when you leave. I do hope you'll complete the survey. This helps us plan webinars and workshops that meet your needs. Employers in the San Francisco Bay Area have access to commute consultants through 511 Rideshare, 511 Contra Costa, the Peninsula Traffic Congestion Relief Alliance, Solano Napa Commuter Information, and the San Francisco Department of the Environment. We have a slide with information about how to find these commute resources in your county toward the end of the presentation. Now, I'm very pleased to introduce Elham Shirazi. Elham?
Thank you very much, Stephanie, and thank you all for joining us in this webinar on teleworking. What you're going to listen to in the next hour and a half are basics on teleworking, the latest data and information, the impact on trip reduction, as well as some tips on how to implement programs within your organizations. I think that it's best for all of us to kind of get on the same page in terms of a definition of what we think of teleworking. Obviously, what we're talking about is extending the workplace beyond the traditional office. Often we find that employees are working at home, but it's not unusual in the past few years to also find that some employees work at home part of the time and then drop into the office or hotel, meaning that the office becomes treated more like a hotel where the employee is only going to the office as needed, and they make an arrangement ahead of time to describe their needs in terms of if it's a meeting room or if it's a private calling area, and those arrangements are made ahead of time. Typically, teleworking is more of a voluntary arrangement, meaning neither the employee nor the manager is forced to offer teleworking. However, we have to be very careful that teleworking does not become considered as an entitlement. And what I mean by that is if employees view teleworking as a benefit, then they think it's available to all, and that can never be true of teleworking. So we have to be very careful in how we describe teleworking in the organizational context, that the job has to be right, the employee has to be right, the technology has to be right, and the manager has to approve of the employee's participation. that's why we always say that teleworking is a management prerogative. And what we have found as a result of technology these days is not only can we successfully replace the commute with teleworking, so it becomes the uncommute or the non-commute, but that we are also able to replace some business-related travel that happens during the day through the uses of audio conferencing, web conferencing, and video conferencing. Teleworking plays a big role in business continuity, and with our construction projects, weather-related type of disasters that come up. A lot of employees are able to work at home and not miss any productivity. Teleworking needs planning and consensus building within the organization. Although there are a lot of templates online available for policies and agreements, really the details and the devil's in the details, in that you want to have some consensus within the departments of an organization, such as HR, IT, facilities, risk assessment, and some of the departments that are going to be in the pilot as to how the program will play out within your organization. Technology is key. I always say that IT has to be your best friend in this process. And obviously, we need upper management commitment to start a pilot, and we need middle management commitment so that managers can feel that they have control over this program. They can select the right people, they can select the right jobs, and if the situation doesn't work, they can always bring the people back to the office. We also want to share with you what teleworking is not. Teleworking is not always full-time. A lot of organizations find that they can have people telework a day a week, 2 days a week, or even once every other week, and still have very successful results. Teleworking is definitely not a replacement for child care or dependent care. A lot of times we see these pictures showing a mother with a baby on their lap behind a laptop, and that's definitely the wrong image of teleworking. If you have a small one at home or have a dependent, you really need to have care in place for both of those situations. Teleworking is not a day where employees do not participate in communications with the office. In fact, there should be emails going back and forth. There should be phone calls. Managers should feel free to call the employee. Coworkers should feel free to access the employee. So the only thing different is the location of work. As I mentioned before, teleworking is not a benefit, and I often tell employers it's best to use a term such as telework is an alternative workplace strategy, as opposed to say it's a benefit, a reward, a perk, or a privilege. I think all those words are misleading. What teleworking definitely is not is extending the workday. Sometimes employers tell me, we have a telework program in place. Our people can go home and access their files and, see their emails. And, that is extending the workday. The concept behind teleworking is that you can spend the whole day at home and not have to travel, hopefully, unless you have to go to a business meeting in the middle of the day, as opposed to do extra work for the office. And in today's context, teleworking is not always expensive. Some companies start with those who have the right technology, have the remote access, have the right phones, and sometimes an investment in some of the new technologies for remote access is not as expensive as it used to be. So moving on, as I've mentioned before in the previous slides, there are really 4 elements that have to come together for teleworking to succeed. And these include, A, the job has to be right. It's got to be a job that can be done at a remote location, at least for part of the time. B, the employee should be right, and we're going to talk about what that means. The technology obviously has to support the person working from a remote location. And very importantly, the manager has to approve of the arrangement. Teleworking is a management prerogative. So it's never a grassroots-driven type of a movement or change in the organization. It really requires top-down buy-off and approval of the program. To give you some examples of where we've seen really great savings, there are so many examples today. and there's so much data on teleworking. But just as a few of them, Bank of America offers a My Work program where the employees get a choice to actually, in many regions, either get office space or to work at home full-time. And what they do is they provide drop-in stations for the times when an employee has to meet with a client or has to come into the office to do something. I mean, obviously this is not for the tellers, but it's for a lot of other functions that, the bank has. And, the reason I put the bank there, they have thousands of people doing this across the country, and you can imagine the nature of the confidentiality and the security of the work that they do. Sun Microsystems, obviously right in Northern California, found out years ago that they didn't need all the real estate that they had, and actually went to hoteling, meaning, that employees sometimes check in to the office, and ahead of time let the office know through an electronic concierge what they're going to need access to. Maybe it's a meeting room, maybe it's certain equipment, so that if they come in, that the space is customized. And in fact, they've become so good at this that they offer consulting services. Another example, and I bring up a federal example because the federal government has a mandate for teleworking, is the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, where employees completed 40% of all their work hours under a telework arrangement this past year. And I'll talk a little bit more about the federal program in a second. Dow Chemical is another big user of telework, and they save a third of non-real estate costs, meaning they save in productivity, in recruitment retention, in absenteeism through teleworking. A number of other companies listed at the bottom, as you can see, have shown that home-based employees tend to be 20 to 40% more productive than their office counterparts. And with a lot of these companies, such as American Express, we're dealing with widgets, so it's easy actually to measure productivity. But that's not to say that teleworking is not for jobs that are measurable by objectives. In fact, in order to have a telework program, you have to have good measurement and monitoring performance monitoring procedures in place prior to the program. Okay, moving on. I want to share with you a little bit of return on investment data. Let me tell you that these numbers are based on about 40, 50, 60 case studies. We have so many case studies and a lot of research that has been completed since the 80s on teleworking. And a few numbers that stand out is, amongst them, if teleworking is implemented correctly, meaning, again, the right job, the right employee, the technology, and the management buy-in, productivity tends to go up and not down. And, in fact, with all telework agreements and policies, there is an out in that a manager or a teleworker can terminate the arrangement at any time. And so if an employee's productivity drops, it really is up to the manager to talk to them, and then if it doesn't change, to bring them back to the office. Typically, the range of productivity increase is about 10 to 20 days. And somehow I've done a lot of surveys in a lot of different parts of the country, and we ask people even about information-based jobs. It's interesting that managers and employees that say productivity has gone up typically come up with a 20% increase. Somehow it's something around that 20%, 19 or 21, and that's kind of the magical number. We also know that employees can actually do use less personal time off as a result of teleworking. In the event of an emergency, the plumber's coming, their car isn't working, someone's coming to hook up their cable so they can telework, they can talk to their manager and see if teleworking is an option for that day. But the caveat being everything should be above board. I have also heard from people that say, sometimes I'm a little sick. If I have to drive in, it would make it very difficult, especially if I have a 3-hour commute. But again, you need to talk to your manager. If you're sick, you're really sick. If you're just a little sick, then the productivity should be visible if you're going to use it as a telework day. Obviously, telework is a big morale booster, and let me share with you that when we ask employees if teleworking is a factor with them staying with their jobs, something in the range of 50 to 65% tell us that it's an important factor in them staying with their current job. Obviously, some other return data in terms of return on investment is that it makes it easier to communicate against, among different time zones. As we know, sometimes it's hard for us to, communicate with different time zones, being that we're a little bit later, but also internationally, a lot of times it's easier to take some of those calls at home as opposed to, at a very late hour in the office. I've talked about business continuity. Again, hopefully your emergency planners are thinking about teleworking and how teleworking can be, a great way to have a productive workforce. I can tell you that one of the companies I worked with, Russell Investments in Seattle, they actually, during the last snowstorm, and I know we don't get snowstorms, but we get other emergencies, but in the last snowstorm in Seattle in February, by the virtue of having a telework program, and this was because they relocated and they opened up teleworking to a lot of people in the organization, of the 900 and some employees, actually 900 teleworked when the snowstorm hit, and they were prepared for it. So Russell Investments did not miss a beat because of the snowstorm. For a lot of companies, teleworking offers a great way to save on facility costs, and actually this can go both ways. Either if you're expanding and you don't want to add space, maybe there are possibilities to get people to share desks or get more people to telework so that you can accommodate the expansion in the workforce. Or in this economy, when we've seen a lot of organizations shrink in size, when the ability is there to change their lease, they go to a smaller facility, and again, get people to telework and are able to save quite a bit of real estate. On average, about 30% of real estate is underutilized on any given day. And, the way we know this is by doing counts of, who's sitting at their desks. And I actually urge you to do that count in your office and see what kind of number you come up with. Obviously, teleworking can reduce the demand for parking spaces. For many of you, that may translate into tens of thousands of dollars on a monthly basis, in terms of what you need to have in terms of parking. Obviously, teleworking it helps your organization become more green, because the best thing about telework is that it's the uncommute, and we're basically there. It's a complete trip elimination in many cases. As far as workforce demographics, this is the first time in history that we have 4 generations working side by side. And let me tell you, as we look at some of the attributes of these 4 generations, the traditionalists are typically, they sacrifice more, they're more dedicated. But what we're faced with in today's economy is that a lot of people who are baby boomers and traditionalists are getting ready to retire, and that's if the economy didn't hit them too bad. And for many organizations, this may mean a big loss in talent because, what they're looking at is, in some cases, about 50%, 40% of their workforce looking at retirement. So teleworking is a great tool for being able to retain some of those key employees and make sure that you can still tap into their talent. With Generation Xers and Yers and the millennials, I have to say that they're not cube sitters. For them, teleworking comes a lot more easier. They place a lot more value on life balance, and I guess that's part of their age group. But they also like to work for organizations that are clean, they're green, they're interested in sustainability. So I think what really this slide shows is that teleworking cuts across all types of demographics within the organization. But again, it has to come down to, the job being right and the employee being right. What I have here is I've used the Telework Impact Calculator, which is based on California Air Resources Board numbers. And this is just to demonstrate, and we developed this one for Southern California. But if you had a company of 50 and 10 employees teleworked once a week, I just want you to see what kind of savings you could see in terms of vehicle miles not traveled. Obviously, these are all based on averages, but, you would save 591 barrels, 30 barrels of oil, 591 gallons of gas, and 6 tons of greenhouse gases. So the values are quite large. The next example just shows the same type of numbers for a company of 150 with 30 employees teleworking twice a week. And by the way, the source for this is teleworksocal.com, teleworksocal.com. You can go in and plug in your own numbers there if you like. So this actual chart, shows that if you had 30 people teleworking twice a week, again, those savings could be quite large. The employees save, the company saves in terms of productivity, absenteeism, recruitment, retention, and as we can see, the impact on the environment can be quite substantive. Here's another example. It takes it a little bit further. We've got 100 employees teleworking at a company that has 500 employees. And as you can see, we save 55 tons of greenhouse gases and over 1,000 pounds of emissions. So once again, not only from an air quality basis, but also from a VMT basis and from a dollars perspective, this program is a win-win for everybody. Here's another piece of data on teleworking and productivity. I based this on a survey that I conducted with 15 companies in Metro Atlanta. And in the database, we had 363 teleworkers and 124 managers. We asked them a lot of questions about productivity, and here's how some of those answers panned out. 74% of teleworkers that answered the survey said that productivity had increased. The rest thought it had stayed the same. 85% of the managers said that either productivity had gone down or had stayed the same. And the way that number broke down was straight down the middle. So half of them thought it had gone up, half thought it had stayed the same. 2% reported a decrease in productivity, and my question to that is, why didn't they bring those people back? Because if anyone's productivity drops, you should bring those employees back. And very interestingly, that 20% figure for both managers and employees who answered the question of how much did productivity increase is what came up. So, again, the average increase seems to be about 20%. I wanted to share a little bit more data with you. When you look at Fortune's 100 best companies to work for, every year the number of companies that actually offer teleworking increases. And in 2012, of the 100 that made the list, 85 offered telework and 80 offered compressed work weeks. In the 80s, only 2 offered compressed work weeks and 3 offered telework. So I have to say we've come quite a long way, and I do want to tell you that actually Cisco leads the charge among some of these with the number of people who are teleworking. They actually have about 90-95% of their workforce that are teleworking. Another study, World at Work, this is an organization and that does a lot of studies on teleworking. It has a membership of about 5,000. Obviously, there was some bias in terms of who answered the survey that they put up, and about 1,500 of their members answered it. But I think what was very interesting was that 83% of those employers said that they offer ad hoc teleworking, meaning episodic, or on occasion if there's a sick child. Again, not a replacement for daycare, but if you have an older kid, they're sick, you can talk to your boss, you got to go pick him up from school, perhaps you can telework. 85% said that they offer telework on at least once a month, but not full time. 57% allow their employees to telework at least a day a week. Again, not full-time. And I was very surprised to see the 37% number in terms of full-time teleworking. So, again, this is all to show that teleworking is no longer a futuristic, underground, secret movement, but it's definitely part of what we're doing in order to gain, to get productivity. I'm not going to spend too much time on the Federal Telework Enhancement Act of 2010, but the federal government often introduces bills and law, really, to enforce their own federal agencies to offer teleworking. And this latest one that was signed by the President in 2010 requires every federal agency to have a telework policy, to have a coordinator, to actually publish a list of eligible employees for teleworking, to offer training, to integrate teleworking into business continuity, and also to measure the impact. And believe me, they have to report these numbers to OPM, the Office of Personnel Management, and once in a while you see nasty letters fly off from different congressional leaders to some of the agencies about why they're not participating. I wanted to give you kind of an overview of what's involved in implementing telework. Again, we would need a day for me to really go in detail over every single step, but I will share a level of detail with you in the next slides. Obviously, first and foremost is getting management commitment. You need someone at the executive level which says, yes, let's do a pilot, let's test this out. So we need an executive champion. And we also need management commitment at the middle management level, but a lot of that can be gained through training and having policies and parameters around the program. We definitely need someone who's in control of this ship. A lot of times it's someone from HR. And this person usually, helps put the policies together, conducts meetings with the steering committee, which I will talk about in a second. They help conduct the training and the evaluation. And really, for a program to be organic to your organization, you need to work with a steering committee. So I know a lot of companies say, hey, that's easy. I can just write policies, on my own. But what we have found is that developing consensus around a program is very important. So you do need a team of executives that are working together to make the program yours. There are a lot of templates out there for policies and agreements and for training, but the whole point is to make sure that you can, develop a program that fits your corporate culture. And who sits on the steering committee often comprises of HR, definitely IT, because remember, they have to be your best friend. Sometimes facilities, because they're looking to impact on facilities. Sometimes it's risk assessment, because they want to, make sure issues such as security, confidentiality, all of that are taken into consideration. You have representation from the pilots, or the groups that are going to be in the pilot. Again, these are at management level. Typically, there's not an employee representative on the steering committee because this is a management-driven type of a concept. And, obviously, employees not all employees want to telework. A lot of companies worry about this, that, if I implement a program, everyone's going to want to telework. But you know, from some of the data that we've picked up, about 50% of people tell us that either their jobs don't lend themselves to teleworking or they don't want to telework. So I think this is a myth out there. So going back to the steering committee works on the policies, and we'll talk about what's included in the policies. There's often an agreement form that is developed for the employee to sign and say, I will abide by all the policies that the company has put together. A lot of times these agreements have to be renewed on an annual basis. The role of the steering committee is also to look at costs and savings and really look at the technology component. Obviously, we have to go in with a platform that IT is most comfortable with, and a platform that's safe and secure. So we'll talk about this a few slides down. We also want to talk about eligibility at the steering committee level. Which jobs are eligible, which employees are eligible, what are some eligibility criteria so that non-productive employees actually don't get into the program. And a very important element is to actually train both the managers and the teleworkers. Now, what I've often done, and we've done this with a lot of our 511 clients, 511 ride-share clients, we actually go in and we train the managers first on the policies and the particulars of the program. And after the managers have gone through the program, through the training, they feel a lot more comfortable that this is not a loose program. It has rules, it has parameters, and it helps them in terms of assessing the jobs and the employees. So we let the message resonate with the managers so they buy into this concept, and then train the teleworkers once they've been selected on very similar principles, but also in issues such as ergonomics and how to set up the home environment and train family. And obviously, evaluation and troubleshooting are critical to this process. I highly recommend doing focus groups within 3-4 weeks of the program. These are basically just simple discussion forums with the managers and with the teleworkers, but separate from each other to find out what's working and not working. And it would be really good to survey at the end of maybe a 6-month period to capture before and after behavior. To see what the impact's been on transportation, but also to capture data on productivity, morale, recruitment, retention, impact on coworkers, etc. Now, there are a number of issues that I do want to touch briefly. Some of these I'm going to touch a little bit more detail in the coming slides. But I did want to share with you that when an employee works at home, workers' comp applies to their designated workspace at home, because the home becomes an extension of work. However, workers' comp only applies to where their designated workspace is, and while they're doing company functions and sometimes during the agreed upon hours for work. The question you may ask is, what has this done? Have we seen a lot of cases? The good news is that we have not seen a lot of cases of workers' comp related to telework. One of my clients, County of LA, has thousands of teleworkers, and these are represented, non-represented, exempt, non-exempt. Past 15 years, not a single case of telework workers' comp related to telework. However, we do put the onus on the employees to establish a safe home environment. OSHA does not require you to do home inspections. Very few employers do, but every employer reserves the right to come in and inspect the workspace with advance notice. I'm going to touch upon these other issues on the other slides. I want to talk a little bit about the middle management issues that typically come up. Obviously, the first one is, how do I know they're working? And I'll tell you, what works really well is when we do training, I really turn this question back on the managers and ask them, how do you know your employees are working today? Because we all know that being present does not equate to productivity. We can sit at our desks look very busy, and not be very productive. So it really forces everyone to think about how do we measure productivity. And it really does come down to not only when you came to work, when you left work, which both of those can be done electronically. It's easy to know. People can send a morning greeting, can send a goodbye greeting, or if you have remote access, you can see when they check in and check out. But really going back to management by objectives, management by deliverables, knowing the quality, the quantity, the timeliness. Some other issues that come up are communication issues. How will I reach staff? Well, you call them, you email them, if you have the ability, you send an instant message or same time. So a lot of our tools don't change. The only difference is that maybe once a week you can't have that impromptu face-to-face. And a lot of people find that actually, that works pretty well because it gives you a lot of productive time. Some employers, actually every employer, is worried about the equity issue. What about those who can't telework? And this is where communication about the program has to be done well, in that we don't raise expectations. Again, we don't call it a benefit. We don't call it a perk. We call it a workplace strategy. We say that it's only appropriate for some jobs when the job is right, employees right, technology works, manager approves. By the way, I have even worked with unions who have adopted exactly that type of language in their union guidelines, so that in no case does teleworking become an entitlement. However, I do also want to say that, there's really nothing that equitable about the office place anyways. We sit in different places, we get different pay, we do different jobs, and it's great to have many tools in your toolbox. So, as you offer those eco-passes, or as, you allow for commuter choice, telework is another tool in the toolbox. Or, as you also allow people to maybe work a compressed work week. Selecting the right employees, we're going to talk about. There are certain attributes that you look for, but obviously productivity has to be at the right level or exceed expectations for someone to be selected. And with safety and ergonomics, we have safety checklists that we give employees. We teach them about ergonomics and training. And I'll tell you, not too many companies go and inspect offices, but if you're setting up equipment and furniture, as I was told in the case of Intel, of course, they are inspecting the home office. But in many situations where the employee is setting it up, we're really depending on the employee, setting up that office space. There are a lot of national organizations with telework programs. Here's just a list. I've actually worked with quite a few of these, and here's actually some more. But, as you can see, there are examples in the Bay Area as well. By the way, we're working very closely right now with Santa Clara County with a couple of pilots, and we've worked with Yahoo and a few others up in Northern California. Now, I want to go through implementation, and again, I want to remind you that there are many different levels that you have to get commitment. Upper management through return on investment, which means what's in, how does it impact my bottom line? Middle management by training and helping them understand that they are in control of this program. They decide who teleworks, if they telework, how often they telework, if they can continue teleworking. Obviously, the employees don't need much convincing, and the best way to approach this would be through a short proposal, maybe to upper management. Issues that upper management are sensitive to, again, bottom line issues. I talked about these earlier. By the way, as we mentioned, this is being recorded, so you have access to these slides later. With middle management, it's some of the questions that are closer to them. that that I tried to answer a little bit earlier. But the issue of equipment obviously is important. No, you don't equip people at home and at work. You try to go to laptops, or sometimes we allow people to use their own equipment. And sometimes if someone's going home full time, then you let the employee just to take what they have at work. Okay, we talked about some of these. To get organized, we definitely recommend that you do a short proposal. Nobody wants to read a 20-page document, but maybe your proposal, to upper management would include, some of the bullets that are here, a definition, why your company's doing it, what are the bottom line, benefits that you can get, what are some costs and savings. I really recommend that you start at cost neutral and maybe start with people who have the right equipment and have the right level of connectivity to see, how the program works for you, and to identify implementation steps. The coordinator, we talked about a little bit. I think you got a flavor for what kind of person we're looking for, but obviously this is the person who really helps champion the program, makes presentations, provides orientation, is really the point person for the Telework program. It could be that it's the transportation coordinator, but a lot of times I see this getting kicked up a little bit higher within HR because it is an HR policy. We talked about the steering committee and how you want to have decision makers, and this is the group that determines, do you want to start with a pilot that maybe is just 1 day a week? Do you want to start with a program that is in one department or multiple departments? What's the size of the pilot we want to consider? What are the equipment considerations that have to be made? Is there remote access? So it usually takes a steering committee about 4 meetings to put the program together. And one of the components that they work on are obviously the policies. We have a lot of policy templates, but again, these templates need to be taken and adjusted to your corporate culture, your organizational culture, and in the policy and in the agreement, we identify goals for the program. We talk about how this arrangement does not change the employee's responsibility, pay, vacation, anything. The only thing different is the location of work. We talk about liability. By the way, if someone comes into a teleworker's home and they fall, that's the employee's liability and not the employer's. We talk about resources in terms of technology or supplies. A lot of times supplies are left between the employee and the manager to decide. We talk about insurance of the equipment. If it's yours, you provide it. If it's the company's, the company provides it. We talk about the workspace, how you have to have a designated workspace, and it has to always be the same place. There's discussion of the eligibility criteria. It may be that you decide it's only for exempt employees. It may be that, it's only for people who have the company technology. And obviously, there's certain attributes that come into play. And the need for communication is critical in this process for employees to have ways to identify when they're teleworking, how people can get in touch with them. So whether you have electronic boards, whiteboards, there should be a mention of where the employee is, because if an employee is teleworking, they're accessible. They should be able to be in contact with you. So in terms of conducting a job assessment, you want to look at a few factors such as, is the job project-oriented? What's the impact on others if this job is done remotely, as little as, 1 day a week? What's the need for specialized equipment? How much face-to-face is needed? And actually, I'm sorry, let me go to this slide first. Here's a slide which actually shows a high-level tool for determining whether or not a job could be ideal for teleworking. And as you can see, you rank it based on independence, on measurability, which anyways, any job should be measurable, at the impact on others, need for specialized equipment, teamwork, face-to-face interaction, etc. And then we also want to assess whether a teleworker is appropriate. And this goes back to having good organizational skills, being a self-starter, having good working relationships, and very much tied often to determining whether or not an employee is the right choice. You want to have filters, such as the performance rating. Sometimes it's tenure, how long they've been with the organization. Sometimes it's, what grade they're in. Sometimes it's open to exempt and non-exempt. Sometimes employers go slower. They open it to exempt and then consider the non-exempt later. And, you can look at the organizational structure. Typically, employee characteristics that are ideal for teleworking are listed here. As you can imagine, it's someone who is an independent worker, is results-oriented, self-motivated, they're a self-starter. And here's a chart, by the way, at a high level if you want to look at whether or not an employee is appropriate for teleworking. Sometimes it's good if you're on the fence to actually fill something like this out, and decide, with a ranking of 1 to 5, 5 being the highest, whether or not the employee has the right skill level, if they have good relationships, if they're flexible, they're organized, etc. Obviously, the technology component is critical. What we have seen is that a lot of IT departments today actually have more bells and whistles than are turned on. And what's interesting is that a lot of organizations have remote access without teleworking, so that people can go home and access their files and keep working. But as I said, IT really needs to be part of this discussion, and it should be what they're comfortable with. And very important to identify how employees are going to be accessing files, accessing emails, making sure that IT is comfortable with how that's happening. I strongly suggest that you don't send anybody home unless their technology has been tested, because otherwise they'll spend the first day of teleworking trying to get their equipment together. And we need to make sure that we have identified the level of tech support that's available, the hours of tech support that are available to people who are at home, because they will also have needs. Obviously, the steering committee wants to, look at some costs and savings. As I talked about, there could be quite a bit of return on investment if a program's done well. Usually, the most tangible savings for a lot of organizations are space. So that's an easy one. And I can tell you, I've been in this economy to so many companies that say, you see all this space today, next month we won't have it. So show us how we can telework. But having said that, there are ways to, estimate the savings on productivity based on some of the return on investment numbers that I gave you, recruitment, retention, morale, all of those come into play. And, there needs to be a determination for cost. Is there a cost for remote access? Are we going to at some point provide people with equipment? So these all, have to be discussed at the steering committee level as well. There are adjustments for management when people start teleworking. We definitely have to rely on measuring by results. Trust is a critical component in this formula, and the trust has to strengthen over time, but we have to trust someone we send home. If it's somebody you have to call every hour on the hour to see if they're working, that's not a good choice. There have to be excellent communication and access procedures in place so everybody knows how to get a hold of the other person. And by the way, as it is, when you walk through an office today, it's so hard to know where people are. So I always tell teleworkers, put something on your desk the day before which says, teleworking today, call me because, people are on different schedules, they're visiting clients, they're on a compressed work week day. So it's really good for when people are teleworking to know, and for everybody to know that this is their telework day and they're accessible. And obviously, managing the team environment is critical, but I always want managers to remember that they have to practice saying no. And what I mean by that is that if there's an important meeting, you need the employee in, they have to come in. There's nothing sacred about a telework day. And managers should really not worry about losing control because this program is under their control. They make the decisions as to who can telework, if they can telework, how frequently they can telework, or if they have to come back to the office. Obviously, there's some trepidation for employees too, and we get over these in training with both the managers and the employees. Employees also, ask, well, how will my manager know that I'm working? And we go back to it. Look, it's based on your deliverables, your communication, and, that's why you have to be very visible when you're teleworking. Some employees are worried about being lonely. I know some of you may snicker at that, but once in a while we have people who come back and say, I was just too lonely, and they also have to learn to deal with distractions in the home. An important component to the program is evaluation. I highly recommend you do those anecdotal focus groups up front to find out what's working and not working and to troubleshoot. Sometimes we have to interview employees and managers. And I really recommend doing surveys after the program is settled because otherwise you may pick up some information that's really not true of where the program will be in 3 to 4 months. Successful programs, pilots, have commitment, as you can see, are seamless, fit your culture, and hopefully plan for expansion over time as the program proves successful. At this point, I'm going to give it back to Stephanie to talk about resources and commute support in your area.
Great. Thank you, Elham. Thank you very much. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and type those into the questions box. We've had a couple come in through chat so far, so you've got some time to put your questions in there for Elham. We have a slide up on the screen now which says commute support in your area. Now, the Spare the Air Employer Program is for employers in the San Francisco Bay Area. I know we do have some folks from outside our area today on the webinar, and you are very welcome to join us. But these resources that we have available are for folks in the Bay Area. What we have is a screenshot of the 511 rideshare page. That's rideshare.511.org. If you go to that page and click on the Employers tab, and then you can get to resources. There's employer contacts, and then you would just scroll down and look for the county that your business is in. So because some of the counties do have different agencies that support them. So that's why we put that screenshot up there. You can see where to go. That is a big website. If you haven't been to 511rideshare.org, there's a lot of information there. So make sure you go to the employers section to click on that link.
Okay, and the next page.
And the last slide we have is just a slide of our Employers Spare the Air page. If you're not a member of the employer program, we encourage you to go to www.employersparetheair.org and register your company. It only takes a minute. Of course, there is no cost for being a member of this program. And by doing so, you'll be sure to get future webinar and event invitations. You'll also receive our quarterly newsletter called The Breeze and have access to lots of other resources. There's one of our trains going by in the background.
Oh, we didn't really hear it.
That's a big train. Okay. All right. So questions for Elham. We have one that just came. Oh, how do we get a copy of the presentation? A lot of folks have been asking us that question. So the presentation has been recorded, and we'll have a link up on employersparetheair.org in a few days. And if anyone who's on the program today as a participant or anyone who registered, and even if you didn't make it onto the call, we will send you an email with that link in a couple of days. It'll take us a few days to get this all uploaded and everything. So watch for that email. Now, we have a question, Elham, that's about funding for telework programs. The question is, what types of funding exist from transportation sources and others to implement and incentivize telework policies in organizations and or citywide in an area? Is it restricted to the regional level, i.e. 511? Can you talk about funding?
Sure, I can talk about...
is there funding available?
There's really no funding available, but there are regions that use their CMAQ funding to provide resources to employers. As an example, let me just talk about another area. In the state of Georgia, the Clean Air Campaign has a very robust telework program, and they use part of their CMAQ funds to actually provide employers with a whole suite of consulting services, and they do a lot of research and host events around telework. I know that with 511 Rideshare, we've also assisted employers free of charge because it results in trip elimination. So that's really the source. Now, there are no tax credit incentives. Unfortunately, we've tried to get them many times, but sometimes within some states they offer them. I know within Montgomery County in the state of Maryland, there is a tax credit for employers to purchase equipment. I know that there is a tax credit for the state of Virginia regarding teleworking, but unfortunately there is nothing in California.
Okay.
And there's nothing at the federal level.
Elham, we've got a few more questions here.
Sure.
They're starting to come in fast and furious. So,
okay.
Are you familiar with organizations using telework to quantify greenhouse gas reductions for environmental review like CEQA or compliance with the Municipal Climate Action Plan? And do you think this is a cost-effective way to reduce greenhouse gases, and is it scalable?
Stephanie, I don't think I'm very well equipped to answer that question because it seems like it's a little bit more technical, but I know that a lot of times I work with the sustainability side of the house to actually implement a telework program. Mm-hmm. So it is part of, the effort to reduce greenhouse gases. Now, I don't know about exactly whether or not it's scalable, and again, there are calculators that can capture what that impact is.
Right, and you showed those calculators
yes.
earlier. And
yes.
Brant, we can talk offline about this if you want to have a more in-depth discussion. But Elham did talk about the calculators that look like they're pretty straightforward to use. Okay, here's one. You touched on this, Elham. Maybe you can just speak to it again. How do you address liability concerns that employers may have? And I know I've heard this one too. What happens if somebody burns himself making a cup of tea? If an employee gets injured in their home office, how does the business protect itself from legal action? Maybe you can just reiterate what you said earlier on that.
Well, I mean, there are a couple of things. First of all, this is what we go over this a lot in training. So we make it very clear to the employees, look, if you cut your hand in the kitchen, you're on your own. In the event that somehow something happens to you in the office, I don't know, the computer falls on your foot, which is a very rare occasion, what you have to do right away is you call the office and let your manager know, and you deal with it the same way you deal with workers' comp in the office. Okay.
And then would that apply to carpal tunnel and those kinds of things as well?
Well, you have to report. You report it as soon as it happens. Mm-hmm. It really will be dealt with just as if it would be dealt in the office. But you have to remember that this, where workers' comp applies, is just within the designated area. That's why you can't work in different parts of your house every day. You have to have a setup. You should have a desk. You should have a good chair. You should look for lighting and how it impacts you. You should be cognizant of noise. You should definitely have an ergonomic chair. So there's a lot that goes into, again, training the employees to set up the right space. By the way, you've got to trust these employees. So, we're not going to send someone home who's going to come up, with some kind of creative workers' comp type of a claim. So trust is critical, and I think that's what has helped. Now, I do encourage you to call your workers' comp carrier and tell them, I'm thinking about implementing a telework program. I will ask you to call them. Their answer will probably be, no, your rates won't change unless you get a lot of workers' comp cases as a result of teleworking. Okay. So the good news is, as an industry, those numbers have not gone up.
Very good. Well, the next question sort of ties to that. You mentioned the type of people who are working at home. This question is from Michael, says, much of the criteria for determining employee eligibility seems very arbitrary. Have there been cases of discrimination brought forth by employees who were denied telecommuting options?
You can always fail a grievance for anything. I mean, let's face it. But the policy is very clear that this is a management prerogative. And actually, I don't think, I actually believe that by having a process, and sometimes we have an application process that we introduce, that we're really trying to make the process more objective as opposed to subjective. So, obviously the criteria such as access to equipment, access to high-speed internet, being a good performer, maybe, tenure, those have to be the pillars, first of all, for your selection process. But then there are certain employee styles that are not, suitable for working at home. If an employee is, the type of employee who needs a lot of direction and, who's not a self-starter, you've got to, constantly be asking questions, that's not the type, it's just not the right type of employee to send home. So the policy has to be very clear that this is a management prerogative. It's only appropriate, for jobs that are right, employees that are right, technology that works with the manager's approval. And that's how all these programs have been implemented.
Okay.
So
here is another question from Mike. What is typically the primary goal of implementing a telework program? Is there a single goal that usually people are going for?
No. I think I would say that look at that return on investment table that, I presented. It really ties into one of those reasons. But I will tell you that, sometimes it's work-life. Sometimes it's sustainability. Sometimes it is recruitment retention. That's a big one. Even in this economy, recruitment retention, is a big factor. You have a lot of firms up there that are competitive with each other. And then the space issues. Mm-hmm. So you just have to, meet with your steering committee and decide what's your driver, what creates that sense of urgency.
Okay. Here's another one that will probably make our HR people cringe. Will the need for overtime decrease as a result of teleworking? Does it affect your overtime?
Overtime will be handled the same way as it is handled in the office. So, for people who obviously, are hourly, they get through their 8 hours of work. If there's a need for them to go into overtime, then, that has to be done with management approval. So really nothing changes. Okay. Now, I think the other side of that is, are people more productive because they're at home and there are less disruptions? Absolutely. But I think that's a win-win situation for both parties because, the employee's not driving to work, they're saving money, they're not buying food at work, they don't, they're saving on gas, maintenance, commuting time. So it really goes both ways.
Okay. So you have touched on this a little bit, but looking at it more from the employee's perspective than the employer, what are some of the issues that teleworkers should be aware of before they start working at home? Is there anything they should be watching out for?
Oh, sure. I mean, they need to, first of all, they need to assess whether or not their home is appropriate for teleworking at a first. glance. Because if you've got a lot of others, significant others who are going to be in that environment, it may be noisy and it may be difficult to control. So, that might be one issue. For some people, as I said, I know it sounds crazy, but they go home and they get lonely. Although people in the office don't miss teleworkers, they're happy that they're gone. That could be a factor. Training children and family members, especially in the summer, is critical so they don't jump into your work area and, scream while you're in the phone. Making sure that you stay away from distractions at home, because now you're away from office distractions, but the TV's close, the radio's close. You also don't want to have your dog in your office barking and communicating on your conference calls. Being organized is critical. You really need to have a roadmap every time you telework. The day before, make a list. What am I going to do in the morning? What am I going to do in the afternoon? Do I have the resources? And I think that the onus is also on the teleworker to make sure they're communicating with their office counterparts.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I'm sure, especially some of our Bay Area folks who are in software development and are engineers, they already have a tendency to work ridiculously long hours. They might need to be careful not to just be working 24/7 when they're not in the office.
Separate. Right. You need to separate work from life, definitely.
We have another question. Any suggestions for persuading a manager who is currently vehemently against teleworking to a point where they'd consider it? How do you win them over?
Here's what I do. I don't win that manager over at first. What we do within most organizations is we start with the lowest hanging fruit for the pilot, meaning that we, get managers who think this is a good idea, who are willing to take that risk, and get them to first have their employees participate and let the results of those groups, the success of those groups, turn some of those around. Telework programs grow in waves. It's not that at the beginning everyone's going to start. It really is a program that proves itself, and then you can add more. I also have found that sometimes when a manager who is against teleworking comes to training, as long as they don't try to, kind of sink the ship, I've had managers come out of training and tell me, "Thank you, you changed my mind, because now I know I can manage this program." So a lot of times it's taking their fear away. But you know what? In the beginning, just let those naysayers, stay away and go with those who will pave the way for success.
That is a really great point, Elham. Thank you for that. One more question sort of for the HR folks in the crowd. Going back to exempt versus non-exempt workers, do we have to be careful about non-exempt folks using sick time, juggling sick time or vacation time? I guess vacation wouldn't be an issue, but sick time, they're at home. Do they still have to take their sick time when they go to the doctor appointment or something like that? How do you manage those things?
I would revert back to your HR policies as it is today. Nothing changes. So the same way you deal with it today is how you will deal with it when they're teleworking.
Okay, very good. Just looking to see if we have any more coming in. I think we have things that are very similar to what we've already touched on. So unless we have any more questions, folks, we want to thank you for your time today. And again, we will have the webinar recorded, and we'll let you know when that's up. Now, very, very important is the final questions that come up for you, the evaluation. We will continue to offer these free webinars to our employer program members and get the word out to you. And we would love to know what other topics you'd like to hear about. Clearly, there were some questions about measuring the CO2 savings. There may be some interest in LEED certification or CEQA compliance. Anything you'd like to know about, please let us know through that evaluation form. That is going to help us to plan programs that are useful to you. So, Elham, Shirazi, I want to give you another big thank you, a little virtual round of applause here, and thank you so much for that presentation. That was really wonderful.
Thank you.
All right.
That's great to hear.
Thanks all. We'll sign off.
Bye.
Bye-bye.